everyone, welcome to Crafting in Quarantine. My name is Dabney. I'm the young adult librarian at the Twin Lakes Library System and I use they, them pronouns. Today I'm going to be teaching you all how to make salt dough crafts. So I had never made this kind of craft before until last night, and I'll go ahead and say that I think I messed some things up because my finished products were not as wonderful as the ones I've seen online, but I'll go ahead and show you how mine turned out and then tell you how to make them, and then we'll decorate a few. So these, when I made them last night and I rolled out the dough and got it into the shape, they were flat. When they came out of the oven, they had a very lumpy look to them. They were cracked, and then overnight they also got like little bubbly things going on. This is not how it should turn out. It should be flat and smooth. The back also looks all kinds of strange, very cratered. It kind of looks like the surface of the moon. I think what happened was when I was making my mixture, the dough got too wet, and then I ended up adding in a lot more flour, and that kind of, the ratio got thrown off. So I would say, you might not get it right the first time, but keep trying. Thankfully, a lot of these ingredients are fairly inexpensive. So, what are your ingredients? You have flour and salt, just regular table salt. This is kosher salt, and it's coarse, so it's like kind of like these little crystals, and I actually put this in my coffee grinder and ground it up into a fine powder, and I mixed that with the flour. So you need flour, salt, and cold water, and you mix it together. So you do 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of salt, you stir it all together, and then you're going to add in your cold water, about 1 to 2 tablespoons at a time, and you're going to mix it. And you don't want your dough to be too wet or too dry. So you've got to try and find that balance. Unfortunately, my dough got too wet, and then I added more flour, and then I think that's where my problems came from. But the recipe that I found and used is from allrecipes.com, and so they recommended after you've got your ingredients mixed together that you knead the dough for 10 minutes. That's another thing I didn't do because I was like, it's all together, it's good, we're good, and then I started trying to work with it and was like, oh yeah, so this is too wet. So yeah, maybe watch some other YouTube tutorials as well and figure out what I did wrong. But I'm not totally displeased with how my salt dough crafts turned out. They're not what they should be, but they're not terrible, and I can still definitely make something with them. So yeah, after you've got your dough ready, so this is a bit of dough that I saved from last night, and I'm gonna turn the camera down so you all can see me working with the dough and rolling it out. So here we go. Alright, so I just put some flour down on the counter so it doesn't stick, and then you put your dough. I've already worked this dough pretty well earlier. I kneaded it, so it's good to go. If you want to, you could skip this step. So if you don't have a rolling pin or you don't have cookie cutters, what you could do is you can just mold the dough by hand into a shape. But if you do have a rolling pin, this is what you do. So you put the flour down on your surface, then you put some flour on your rolling pin, That's going to keep your rolling pin from sticking to your dough. And you just roll it out. I did it to 1/4 of an inch thick. And then you get whatever shape you want to cut out. So here I have a skull shape. So you just press that in and then remove the remaining dough from around it. Obviously, you'll have a lot more dough that you'd be working with if you made a full recipe. This is only just a little bit of dough. So you carefully peel your shape up, and that's what it looks like. And then I'm going to put this on my baking sheet back here. And let's see. So yeah, that is how you do that. I baked them just on the baking sheet, how it is. Like I didn't, grease it or anything. I just put them on there, baked them. So to bake them, you preheat your oven to 250, and then you bake these for 2 hours to get nice and dry. If you don't have an oven or you don't want to bake them, you could also just leave them out in a place where like nothing's gonna bother them and let them air dry for about 2 days. That way they get nice and dry. So like I said, you could mold your whatever shape you want to do. You could do it by hand. I saw somebody on, I think, YouTube who was making emoji beads. So what this person did was they took, a little bit of dough and they rolled it into a ball. So my dough is not really, I messed up my dough. I'll just go ahead and say that. It's got issues. But they were able to roll their dough into like a ball and used a toothpick to make a hole in that and then let it dry. And then that way they made like a nice little bead. You could mix food coloring in with your dough as well if you want to go ahead and give it some color. This is sort of a ball. Anyways, you can, like I said, you can make your own shapes. You could use cookie cutters, whatever you feel like doing. This is a fun kind of craft that just involves some experimentation. What are words? And I think it's fun for like all ages to do. So once you've got your crafts though and they've baked and they're dried, whichever, that's when you get into the really fun part, which is decorating them. So this is one I just decorated today, and very easy. I did a peace sign in Sharpie, so 2 different kinds of Sharpie, and then I went over it with Mod Podge, and I'm actually going to go over it again. The Mod Podge acts as a seal, so that means it's kind of protecting your craft. And when you're decorating these, you can use Sharpie like I did. You could use paint. You could use both. You could put some Mod Podge down and then sprinkle glitter on that. And then when it's dried, you could go over it again with another coat of Mod Podge. I recommend when you're doing this, like if you color it with Sharpie, that you wait, maybe 30 minutes or so and let that Sharpie really absorb into your dough. Earlier when I did this, I had just colored it with Sharpie and then I went over it with Mod Podge and it smeared the Sharpie and kind of removed it from the dough, which is not what you want. So let things dry, be patient. If you're painting, obviously let it dry really well before going over it with Mod Podge. You could also seal the back of your craft, or one thing I saw on YouTube is this person left the back of the craft unsealed and then they added a scent to it. So I have this, it smells like baking cupcakes. I got this at Hobby Lobby. You could just add a few drops to your craft and then now this smells like baking cupcakes. The person I was watching, they used essential oils, which I don't have any of those, but you could use essential oils. Another thing you can do is if you want to hang this, like the one I made, on the back here, I just hot glued this piece of ribbon. If you want to make an ornament or a pendant or a bead, what you could also do is get a straw, or I mentioned using a toothpick. You could use those to make holes in your dough ahead of time before you've baked it. And then, you know, when it's baked, it's already got a hole in it. You don't have to bother with doing a ribbon. So those are some things you could do to like level up your project. I've never used, like I said, this is the first time I've done salt dough and I kind of messed it up, but I'm not too worried about it because, you know, it is what it is. But one thing you could potentially do, I don't know, make like a little sculpture. I don't know how that would work. If you baked it in the oven, I'm not sure about that. But if you let it air dry, you know, maybe you would have to make pieces of it and then assemble it afterwards. I'm not really sure. You could definitely look into that more online or just kind of experiment and try new things. But I'll just show y'all how drawing on this works. This was a bat that I made. It kind of lost a little bit of the detail, so I don't know, definitely does not look like a batarang, but it's still cool. So like if you're coloring this, you know, like I said, if you wanted, like if you had black food coloring, you could have mixed it in with your dough when you're making the shape, and then it comes out and it's the colors sometimes get a little, they're not as vibrant maybe after you do that, but yeah, you could do that instead of like going through and coloring this all by hand. I also saw on Pinterest that people make some clay with, I think it's either baking soda or baking powder. And I thought that would be interesting to try and do. So yeah, if you've made salt dough crafts before and you have any tips for me, you know, just leave a comment. Be like, Dabney, this is what you did wrong. But I figured salt and flour are two things that, you know, maybe people have at home that they could use for crafts. You don't have to make a whole recipe either. If you just want to experiment with this, you know, instead of doing 2 cups of flour, you could work that down. Like last night, I just did a cup of flour, half a cup of salt, and half a cup of water. But you can make as small batches as you want, honestly. And that way you're not wasting like a lot of supplies if things don't go right the first time. Yeah, I was really surprised at like how easily the Sharpie colors this. I think I've kind of colored or tried to color like plaster before with Sharpie, and that was that didn't really work very well. So this, honestly, it just goes on pretty easily. Yeah, I think that's it for today's video, y'all. Tune in Friday at 3:30 for Slice of Life. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to be doing, so it'll be a surprise to all of us. And, you know, sometimes we need like those little surprises in life. But if you do these crafts, like, let us know how they turn out. And yeah, I hope y'all all have a great day. Bye.